Yeah, I think one thing they can.
I
was going to say, I think one thing they can do, like you were saying, is they can just move around their forces. They can create these little groups, battle groups. You know, I mean, they've got 175,000 troops still floating around. Nobody knows where they're really at. And then they can just drive around. And like you said, as they hit the grid, they can just watch. And whenever there's a spot that's weak, they can just push through. I mean, they've talked about just grinding away and then just looking for a spot to exploit when the time comes.
And we know for a fact from reportings within the Ukrainian military, they're low on radios. They don't have radios per soldier. They don't even have unit radios for most units anymore. They started this conflict out with, I think there's 2-3 radios per I think it was squad, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, you see guys all the time that have those little radios clipped on their thing, but you don't really see it no more.
You don't see it anymore. You see videos coming out. It's like, we just pulled back because we couldn't reach to anybody. There's no way to communicate with anybody. And if you do have a radio, the Russians are just
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wondered if any of you gentlemen think that might explain why they had more. I just wondered if you think that might explain why they had a little bit more of these human wave-like attacks. As far as I've understood it, many of the offenses, especially in the Kherson area, they were. It's not kind of like how modern warfare tends to be done with like fairly, I would say, more coordinated because of the radio, and it's handed to every unit, right? Like it will become more similar to World War II, where unless you have specifically trained troops, where you have like a certain doctrine that enables you to kind of give it, that's well-trained troops, right? Yeah, if you're gonna have that in Ukraine, you can kind of get a little bit around that with radio. But if you don't even have radio, right, how are you going to organize these units moving forward? And then you start getting back to why were there massive assaults going back in the old days? Why did it do much of that? Yeah, well, there were many reasons, but do you guys think it might explain why they did this?
I actually kind of have to defend Ukraine here. It's definitely a little bit propagandized to say that. Oh, that was a lot of feedback.
Yeah, I think it's Archimedes maybe.
Okay. I wouldn't say Ukraine is doing human wave tactics. I think they're.
I had some issues.
You're good. I think it's not human wave tactics because, yes, they're using very, very large numbers of soldiers to try to push through very, very small points of the line. I think what the issue is when you see like these helmet cam videos or like tank cam videos come out of Ukraine, yes, half of it's propaganda, but you can still glean definitely some information out, or drone cam footage. There's a lot of drone cam footage of Ukrainian advances coming through fields, lines, tank lanes that they made. And I think what these losses are actually coming from, these human wave tactics, so to speak, are just the intensity of Russian, I kind of want to say paranoia when it comes to the use of artillery. They'll detect any sort of movement of any sort of armor or infantry through any sort of form, satellite detection, drone detection. They'll have the artillery spotter call out and just say, I have half the Ukrainian army coming at me, wipe this grid square off the map. And
right, so in the sense, it's whether or not the Ukrainians would have radios, they're only like that would only help them when they're so far into the battle itself.
Right, they're not even getting into the heavy conflict.
Yeah, so they have to kind of do like this more or less seemingly unorganized, but it is intentional in order to kind of just get through before the artillery, because they can't really muster and then attack, so they kind of have to muster in motion. So
they have to muster at the Russian line in one way or another.
So if you look at so that would be more in the Kharkiv region, like the northern fronts. That would be because I imagine it would be much more important to have radios in, for example, like in an urban setting, or if you are like kind of detached from your units significantly. But Kherson seemed to me more like where trench warfare, where the proximity of the soldiers were so that maybe that wasn't so important. But what are your guys' thoughts on regarding radios in, for example, the northeastern front and also the Bakhmut area?
I think
Bakhmut is definitely huge. I'll go ahead. Actually, I'll go after you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, if you look at a lot of the videos from like Kherson, where the Ukrainians were retreating and crashing and running over soldiers and driving into ditches, I think that would probably be what you're talking
Dang it.
No.
Oh, sorry.
You need to repeat your last sentence because you just froze over there.
Okay, well, I was going to say that I think that you look at the videos of the Ukrainian attacks where you saw the tanks crashing into each other, driving into ditches, running over Ukrainian troops. I think that's what you're talking about. Like, they would start these attacks. Maybe they're losing their communication vehicles. I mean, you saw how they were just getting hammered driving Humvees through the field.
And it's not that I think they're incompetent, right?
They don't know what's going on around them.
But they know what they're doing in one way or another. They know how to operate all this stuff. It's just the issue is,
it's just that they get disorganized when they start getting hit like that, and then nobody knows what they're doing. You know, they might see some guys pulling back because they just got hammered, and the other guys are going forward. And I think that's where you see a lot of those accidents happen and stuff like that, and that's why people might think that they have really bad communication.
What you're explaining there sounds like very, very reminiscent of how the earlier battles between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia was.
Dang it! You stole my line. I wanted to talk about
that. They were like it's a myth that it was like the winter that ultimately stopped Germany. Yes, it certainly didn't make it better. But there's also this myth that the Germans were just like so superior in every single way. And yes, in many ways they certainly were. There were no fair comparison here.
No, but the Soviets were communicating. They were communicating using flags. I remember there's a bunch of stories. The T-34 commanders would like stick out like in the middle of combat, right? And there'd be other T-34 commanders sticking out their hatches, and he'd be like, "We got to move this way, move like with all the flag."
And so he's shot, and then like who is the next one to pop out and say hello to the other tank over there? Like, and then you have artillery, and you have other shelling fire, like one of said, and
And I think that's the biggest advantage Russia has is no matter what Ukraine does, it's met with massive amounts of artillery. It doesn't really matter. I mean, even if they give up territory, it's like everything's probably been pre-marked and designated with targets, reference points. So even if they pull back and retreat, they just bomb the shit out of everybody.
It's not just artillery. I wonder if it's satellite communications. And I guarantee the Russians have tapped every single radio in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. You imagine they have the best human intelligence network in Ukraine just because they could easily. I mean, think about it. Every time a train comes, there's probably some old man, old pensioner sitting in his window, gets on the phone, says, "Yeah, a platoon of T-72s just stopped at the train station." An hour later, a cruise missile hits it. I mean, there's probably no way they can even stop that kind of intelligence gathering. I mean, I guarantee you. How many times is that stuff spotted by different Russian assets as it travels from Poland into Ukraine?
There was actually a video.
What about Apple AirPods? Who's to say there's not some guy dropping AirPods on MRLS launchers and then flicking them on when they're 2 days down the road?
That's actually of
didn't the Ukrainians get assistance from the U.S. using like a way to kind of have like they could mark their own units with a C to confuse the Russians that they would themselves know because they had like an internal mapping they could go by that had like a digital mapping on that part. And so I would assume that one could probably counter a lot of the disorientation that when the Ukrainians try to push through, they can rely on a few people to kind of feel like no, we are still going on, move on forward, right? That if the Russians are hacking this, like, but
they're not even hacking it; they're just jamming it. So any way you try to communicate, it just jammed. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's essentially useless then.